The vast darkness of space swallowed the small transport vessel as it descended toward Kale 7's frozen surface. Through the viewport, Elena Navarro watched the planet's twin moons cast their pale light over endless fields of crystalline formations. The capsule's environmental readout displayed external temperatures plummeting past 150 degrees Celsius and still dropping. In 12 minutes, they would touch down on one of the most inhospitable planets in the Galactic Academy's training roster. "Initiating final descent protocols," announced the automated pilot. "Cadets, secure all equipment and prepare for atmospheric turbulence." Elena double-checked her analog survival kit, the only human among 24 alien cadets, and the only one without powered armor or advanced environmental gear. Her fellow students had mocked her primitive approach during the journey. Now, as they approached the surface, their derision had turned to curiosity and, in some cases, concern. "You won't last 6 hours in that getup." Verkin, an Alari reptilian cadet, hissed from his temperature-regulated seat. His scaled skin shimmered with the embedded tech that would keep him functioning in the extreme cold. "Humans are so stubborn about proving points that don't need proving." Elena merely smiled, checking the hand-cranked generator in her pack. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. My grandmother survived the Arctic collapse with less than I'm carrying." "Arctic collapse temperatures were balmy compared to a Kale night," interjected one of the Euro twins. Insectoid cadets with gleaming exoskeletons. Their compound eyes swiveled to focus on Elena's worn thermal jacket. "Your species' reliance on analog technology is fascinating, but ultimately impractical." The capsule shuddered as it penetrated the thin atmosphere. Elena braced herself against the wall, watching as her alien classmates accessed their neural interfaces, updating environmental profiles and activating thermal protection systems. She felt a familiar pang of exclusion, quickly replaced by determination. Every cadet at the Galactic Academy had earned their place, but humans were still considered something of a novelty, capable but limited by their biology and resistance to extensive augmentation. "Landing sequence initiated," the system announced. "Kale 7 extreme survival training commences upon exit. Ambient temperature, 178 degrees and falling. Night cycle duration, approximately 500 Earth hours remaining until dawn. Cadets, prepare for evaluation." The capsule touched down with a jolt that rattled Elena's teeth. Ice crystals immediately began forming on the exterior viewport, creating fractal patterns that obscured the alien landscape. Through gaps in the frost, Elena caught glimpses of towering ice formations and deep crevasses that seemed to glow with an internal blue-violet light. Final cadet briefing." A hologram of their instructor materialized in the center of the cabin. "This is not a simulation. Kale 7's night cycle presents genuine survival conditions. Your mission is to establish shelter, maintain adequate body temperature, and survive until extraction. This is a technical challenge, not a competition, though your performance will be factored into your final Academy rankings." The instructor's gaze lingered on Elena. "Some of you have chosen specialized approaches to this challenge. The Academy respects diverse methodologies, but results are what matter. Good luck." The airlock cycled open, and Elena's breath crystallized instantly as the brutal cold invaded the cabin. Her fellow cadets activated their thermal systems, their suits glowing with power as they stepped onto the frozen surface. Elena pulled her insulated hood tight and followed them out. The landscape that greeted her was both breathtaking and terrifying. Massive formations of ice stretched toward the starlit sky like the skeleton of some ancient crystalline forest. The ground beneath her boots crunched with each step. Not snow, but something harder, more crystalline. She knelt and examined the surface closely. These weren't ordinary ice crystals. They had an unusual lattice structure, almost geometric in their precision. A training drone hovered overhead, its red sensor array tracking their movements. Cadets will establish shelter using limited resources. Technological assistance is permitted under passive monitoring constraints. The alien students immediately scattered, seeking pre-existing structures to modify with their high-tech shelters. Elena watched as they deployed nanofabric canopies and molecular bonding tools. Instead of following, she calmly walked toward a small rock outcropping with a narrow cave entrance she'd spotted during descent. The cave was shallow, but provided immediate protection from the howling wind. Elena set down her pack and began a methodical assessment of her surroundings. The cave walls glittered with the same crystalline formations she'd observed outside. She pulled out a small geological hammer and carefully chipped off a sample, examining it under a hand-powered magnifying glass. "Interesting," she murmured to herself. The crystal had an unusual density and refracted light in a way she hadn't seen before. She breathed on it experimentally. The crystal emitted a high-pitched sound, almost like a scream, and released a white vapor. Elena jumped back, startled, but then leaned forward with renewed interest. She recorded her observations in a small notebook, using a pencil that wouldn't freeze like standard digital styluses. "Exothermic reaction to carbon dioxide or water vapor," she noted. "Possible chemical composition suggests hydrates or clathrate structures." While she worked, the wind outside grew stronger, producing an eerie whistling sound as it twisted through the ice formations. Elena paused her examination, feeling a strange static electricity building in the air. Her hair stood on end beneath her hood. Without warning, a blinding flash of electromagnetic energy pulsed across the landscape. The deafening crack that followed shook the ground beneath her feet. When her vision cleared, Elena noticed all the electronic equipment she'd brought for emergency purposes had gone dark. Outside the cave, she heard the panicked shouts of her fellow cadets. "Systems offline, thermal regulation failing, emergency protocols non-responsive." Elena grabbed her pack and cautiously approached the cave entrance. In the distance, she could see Rickon, another Alari cadet, struggling as his suit powered down, leaving him exposed to the brutal cold. The Euro twins were frantically trying to restart their exoskeletal protection systems. Others were running in confusion, their high-tech equipment suddenly useless. Electromagnetic surge, Elena realized. The interaction between the wind and the planet's magnetic field must create periodic EMP bursts. She retreated to her cave and quickly inventoried her analog tools. Unlike her classmates, she wasn't dependent on electronics. Her thermal wear was passive, designed to retain body heat rather than generate it. Still, without an additional heat source, even her specialized gear would eventually fail against the planet's extreme cold. Elena returned to the strange crystal she'd collected. If it had reacted to her breath with an exothermic response, perhaps it had energy potential she could harness. She retrieved the hand-cranked generator from her pack and carefully attached a carbon filament to the crystal. After several failed attempts, a spark jumped between the filament and crystal. A purple flame flickered to life, burning along the crystal's edge with a steady blue flame. The heat it generated was modest but real. "Incredible," Elena whispered, warming her hands over the flame. "The crystal itself is combustible under the right conditions." Over the next few hours, Elena refined her technique. She discovered that the crystals burned most efficiently when arranged in a specific pattern that maximized airflow. The flame produced was unlike anything she'd seen. A deep blue-violet that cast eerie shadows on the cave walls, but generated substantial heat. By the time the night had deepened, Elena had established a stable heat source. The temperature in her small cave had risen to a tolerable level. Outside, however, the situation had deteriorated for her classmates. A shadow appeared at the cave entrance. Verkon stood there, his reptilian form shivering violently, scales dulled without their technological enhancement. His eyes widened at the sight of Elena's fire. "How?" he began, his voice trembling with cold. Elena gestured him inside. "The crystals are combustible. Come in before you freeze." Pride warred with survival instinct on his alien features, before Verkan finally entered, crouching near the flame. "My thermal system is completely fried. The electromagnetic pulse was unexpected." "Not if you'd studied the planet's meteorological records," Elena replied, handing him a crystal. "These aren't in any standard geological database I've seen. I think they're unique to Kale." Verkan examined the crystal with scientific curiosity, despite his condition. "My people evolved on an ice world, but nothing like this. We developed technology to survive, not primitive fire." "Sometimes primitive is reliable," Elena said, adding another crystal to the flame. "Help me gather more. The cave keeps most of the heat in, but we'll need a constant supply." Reluctantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm, Verkan joined Elena's efforts. They developed a system. Elena would identify promising crystal formations, while Verkan, with his superior strength, even without tech enhancement, would break them loose. They stored their harvest in Elena's canvas pack. As they worked, more cadets found their way to the cave, drawn by the faint glow of the fire. The Euro twins arrived together, their exoskeletons frosted over and movement sluggish. One introduced himself as M. The other remained silent, antennae drooping with cold. "We detected thermal radiation," M explained, mandibles clicking. "Our systems are non-functional. May we?" Elena nodded. "The more bodies, the more ambient heat. But everyone contributes to crystal collection." By the 20th hour of the 500-hour night, 8 cadets from various species had taken refuge in Elena's cave. A serpentine cadet named Kira coiled tightly in a corner, conserving heat. 2 bulky telluric cadets, whose gas exchange systems were struggling in the cold, huddled near the flame. With each new arrival, Elena established clear rules. Everyone helped maintain the fire. No one hoarded the heat. And all disagreements were settled by her as the firekeeper. Their survival began to stabilize into a routine. Teams would venture out to harvest crystals, while others maintained the fire. Elena taught them to identify the most energy-dense specimens by their lattice patterns. The aliens, accustomed to technological solutions, were initially clumsy with analog tasks, but quickly adapted under Elena's patient guidance. As the hours stretched into days, the temperature outside continued to drop. By the 100th hour, it had reached 210 degrees, cold enough to freeze oxygen if the atmosphere had contained more than trace amounts. Inside the cave, however, the crystal fire maintained a bubble of habitable conditions. The dynamics within the group had shifted dramatically. Elena, once dismissed as the primitive human, now commanded respect as their de facto leader. Verkan had assumed the role of her lieutenant, guarding the cave entrance and organizing crystal-gathering expeditions. The competitive atmosphere of the academy had given way to something more primal, a community bound by mutual survival. On the 120th hour, their fragile equilibrium was disrupted. Mem, one of the Euro twins, approached Elena as she was arranging crystals for the next burn. "Your method is inefficient," M stated, compound eyes gleaming in the firelight. "I've been observing the combustion rate. With a different arrangement, we could increase heat output by 33% while reducing burn time by 40%. Elena looked up from her work. "We've established a sustainable system. Why risk changing it?" "Because our supplies are dwindling," M replied, gesturing to their diminishing crystal pile. "The nearest accessible formations are now 400 meters out. Efficiency is becoming critical." Other cadets had gathered to listen. Verkan shifted uncomfortably at Elena's side. "M has a point about distance. The last expedition took twice as long and yielded half as much." Elena considered this. M was right about the resources, but she was skeptical about changing their proven technique. What exactly are you proposing? Instead of your 20-minute burn cycle with crystals spaced 5 centimeters apart, we switch to a 12-minute high-intensity burn with crystals arranged in a circular pattern with 2-centimeter spacing. The logic seemed sound, but Elena had learned to trust her instincts. The crystals are unstable at higher temperatures. Your arrangement might cause a feedback reaction. Theory without testing is just speculation, M countered, a challenge in his alien voice. Let me demonstrate with a small sample. The other cadets watched expectantly. Elena recognized a leadership test when she saw one. One test, with a third of our standard burn amount. If it fails, we stick with the established method without further debate. M arranged the crystals according to his design. The others gathered closer, anticipating a breakthrough. Elena stood back, hand near her hammer, instinctively cautious. When M ignited the formation, the crystals burned brighter than ever before, casting sharp shadows across the cave. For 30 seconds, it seemed his theory was correct. Heat output had visibly increased. Then, the crystals began to emit a high-pitched whine. "Back!" Elena shouted, pulling the nearest cadet away from the fire. The crystal formation exploded with a concussive force that sent fragments flying across the cave. M took the brunt of the blast. The chitin on the left side of his face scorched and cracked. The flames died instantly, plunging them into darkness until Elena quickly re-established a conventional burn. As she treated M's injuries with her first aid kit, an unspoken acknowledgement passed through the group. Elena's leadership was no longer in question. Even M, once recovered enough to speak, admitted his error. "I failed to account for the molecular stress under concentrated conditions," he said, voice subdued. "Your method was correct." Elena shook her head. "Science advances through hypothesis and testing. Your theory was sound, just incomplete. Next time we'll collaborate rather than compete." This incident solidified Elena's authority, but it also highlighted their precarious situation. Crystal supplies were indeed dwindling within safe gathering distance. They would need to venture further, or find an alternative source. On the 200th hour, Elena led a small expedition, including Verkan and Kira, to explore a large ice formation she'd spotted about a kilometer from their cave. It resembled a massive frozen maw, with crystal teeth hanging from its upper ridge. The journey was treacherous. The temperature had stabilized at around 220 degrees C, and even brief exposure could cause instant frostbite to exposed skin. They carried a portable crystal fire in a modified container, but it provided minimal protection against the environment. When they reached the formation, Elena's hopes were confirmed. The teeth were actually massive crystal growths, far larger and potentially more energy-dense than anything they'd harvested before. One good-sized specimen could fuel their fire for days. As they began carefully extracting a crystal, a movement caught Elena's attention. She turned to see Kells, a vulnerable cadet who had been conspicuously absent from their shelter community, watching them from behind an ice column. Kells had always been a solitary figure at the academy, physically imposing with natural armor plates, and known for his aggressive training techniques. Now, with his technological advantages neutralized, he looked desperate, his armor plates dull with frost and his breathing labored. "Step away from the crystals," he growled, moving toward them with predatory intent. Verkan moved protectively in front of Elena. "We have a community shelter. You're welcome to join us under the same rules as everyone else." "Rules?" Kells sneered. "This is survival, not a classroom exercise. I need those crystals." Elena assessed the situation quickly. "You've been trying to use the crystals for heat too, haven't you? But you can't get them to burn properly." A flicker of surprise crossed Kells's alien features. "How did you—" "Your left arm is burned," Elena pointed out, consistent with a crystal flash fire. You're approaching it wrong." "Then show me," Kells demanded, taking another step forward. "Return with us to the cave," Elena offered. "We share resources and knowledge." Kells's expression hardened. "I don't share. And I don't need a lecture. I need those crystals." He lunged forward suddenly, shoving Verkan aside and grasping for the large crystal they'd been extracting. Elena reacted instinctively, swinging her ice hammer. It connected with Kells's leg with a solid crack. He stumbled, howling with pain and rage, but didn't release the crystal. As they struggled, the ice beneath them groaned ominously. "Stop!" Elena shouted. "The structure is unstable!" Kells ignored her warning, pulling harder on the crystal. With a thunderous crack, the ice ridge above them began to fracture. Verkan grabbed Elena and pulled her back just as a cascade of ice fragments crashed down, separating them from Kells. When the ice settled, they saw Kells trapped behind a wall of debris, still clutching the crystal, but unable to pursue them. The formation had become too unstable to safely approach. "We leave him?" Kira asked, her serpentine voice neutral. Elena shook her head. "No. We'll send a rescue team once we're back. Everyone survives. That's the goal." They returned to the cave with their harvested crystals, excluding the one Kells had seized. The encounter had shaken the group, raising uncomfortable questions about their obligations to those who refused to cooperate. Elena organized a rescue expedition, but by the time they returned to the ice formation, Kells was gone, having apparently freed himself. Whether he had successfully used the crystal or perished in the attempt remained unknown. The incident cast a shadow over the group, a reminder of how quickly civilization could give way to desperation. By the 300th hour, their situation had grown dire despite their organizational efforts. The nearest crystal sources had been depleted, requiring increasingly dangerous expeditions. The constant burning had also affected their cave, melting portions of the ice ceiling and causing concerning structural changes. After a particularly difficult gathering trip, Elena returned to find water dripping from the cave ceiling, not from melting ice, but from condensation caused by the temperature differential between their heated cave and the frozen exterior. The moisture was refreezing in critical structural areas, creating new stress patterns. As she was examining the ceiling, a loud crack echoed through the cave. A fissure had appeared above the entrance. "Everyone out!" Elena shouted, grabbing her pack and the most critical supplies. "The cave is collapsing!" They barely escaped before the entrance collapsed, leaving only a narrow crawl space where their shelter had been. The group huddled in the open, the brutal cold immediately assaulting them despite their crystal fire. "What now?" asked one of the Telluric cadets, voice muffled by the breathing apparatus he'd fashioned from salvaged materials. Elena surveyed their surroundings, mind racing through options. Their survival had just become exponentially more difficult. Without shelter, the crystal fire alone couldn't maintain survivable temperatures for long. "We move," she decided, pointing to a ridge visible in the distance. "I mapped that area during descent. There's a network of ice caves on the far side of that hill. Deeper, more stable ones." "That's over 3 kilometers," Verkan objected. "In open terrain, at these temperatures." "We don't have a choice," Elena replied, already dividing their remaining crystals among the group. "We'll create a rotating fire system, 2 portable burns at all times, switching carriers every 100 meters to distribute the heat." The journey was excruciating. The wind cut like knives through their clothing, and the portable fires provided barely enough heat to prevent immediate frostbite. They moved in a tight formation, those carrying the fires in the center, creating a moving bubble of marginally survivable conditions. The landscape became increasingly treacherous as they approached the ridge. What had appeared to be a gentle slope from a distance revealed itself as a maze of ice crevasses and unstable formations. Every step required careful testing of the ground ahead. Halfway up the slope, a blizzard struck, not snow, but particles of frozen atmospheric gases, driven by winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. Visibility dropped to near zero. The group linked themselves together with rope from Elena's pack to avoid separation. "We can't continue in this!" M shouted over the howling wind, his mandibles barely able to form words in the extreme cold. "We can't stop either," Elena responded, checking their heading on her analog compass. "Stopping means freezing. Forward is the only option." They pressed on, one agonizing step at a time. The weaker members of the group began to falter, their biological systems reaching their limits despite their alien adaptations. The Euro twins supported each other, while Verkon helped Kira, whose cold-blooded physiology was particularly vulnerable. Elena felt her own strength waning. Her fingers had lost sensation despite her insulated gloves, and each breath burned in her lungs. But she continued forward, knowing that to stop was to die. Just as her vision began to blur from exhaustion and cold, Elena spotted a dark opening in the ice wall ahead, one of the caves she'd hoped to find. With renewed determination, she led the group toward it. The cave entrance was narrow but opened into a spacious chamber that offered immediate shelter from the wind. The group collapsed inside, quickly establishing their crystal fires to warm the space. "Everyone check for frostbite," Elena instructed, examining her own extremities. Her fingertips showed concerning white patches, but nothing that couldn't recover with proper care. As they treated their injuries and warmed their bodies, a faint light caught Elena's attention. Far above, through a small opening in the cave ceiling, she could see a constellation twinkling, not natural stars, but the positioning lights of a satellite array. "Communications," she breathed. "If we can signal them." They had one chance, with their crystal supply dwindling and their bodies pushed to their limits. They pooled their remaining resources for a final burn, one large enough to create a thermal signature that the satellite sensors might detect. Elena arranged the crystals in a precise pattern, larger than any they'd attempted before. It was risky. Such a large burn might destabilize the new cave or create toxic gases in the enclosed space. But the alternative was a slow death as their supplies ran out. "Everyone to the back of the cave," she instructed. "Cover your faces and stay low." With steady hands despite her exhaustion, Elena ignited the crystal formation. The flames erupted in a brilliant blue-violet column that reached toward the ceiling opening. The heat was intense, almost unbearable, but the airflow through the ceiling vent prevented suffocation. For 20 minutes, they maintained the burn, feeding it with their last reserves. As the final crystals were consumed, Elena watched the opening above, searching for any sign that their signal had been detected. Just as the flames began to die, a bright light swept over the opening, the searchlight of a shuttle conducting a sensor sweep. They had been found. The rescue was swift and efficient. Academy medical drones were deployed first, assessing each cadet's condition before evacuation. Despite their ordeal, all 8 survivors were stable, dehydrated, frostbitten in places, but alive. As Elena was helped aboard the rescue shuttle, the Academy captain approached her, respect evident in his posture. "Cadet Navarro, your group's survival is unprecedented. No previous class has endured a Kale Night electromagnetic event without technological assistance." Elena reached into her pocket and handed him a small, remaining crystal fragment, still glowing with internal energy. "Not without technology, Captain. Just with a different kind than expected." The captain examined the crystal with interest. "The Academy's Applied Survival Research Division will want to interview you extensively. This discovery could revolutionize emergency protocols on extreme environment planets." Elena leaned back in her medical pod, exhaustion finally overtaking her. "Right now, all I want is a hot meal and about 40 hours of sleep. Science can wait." As the shuttle lifted off from Kale 7's frozen surface, Elena gazed down at the landscape that had nearly claimed their lives. In the distance, she could see their original cave, the crystal fire now extinguished, but the knowledge it represented spreading throughout the galaxy. The night would continue for another 180 hours before Kale's distant sun would rise again. But Elena and her unlikely community had beaten it, proving that sometimes the oldest technologies, observation, adaptation, cooperation, remained the most reliable. The Academy would analyze and categorize the crystal phenomenon, eventually incorporating it into their standard survival training. Future cadets would learn the technique as a matter of course, never knowing the desperate circumstances of its discovery. But among Elena's group, the experience had forged something that transcended academic achievement, a respect that crossed species boundaries, and a reminder that survival often depends not on the most advanced tools, but on the wisdom to use what's available. As the shuttle broke atmosphere, and the brutal cold of Kale 7 gave way to the controlled environment of space, Elena allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes, primitive really was best. In the medical bay, Verkon approached her pod, his reptilian features still showing signs of their ordeal, but his eyes bright with newfound respect. "The Academy teaches us that technology elevates us above our primitive origins," he said quietly. "But you showed us something different, that understanding fundamental principles can matter more than having advanced tools." Elena nodded, too tired for philosophical debates, but appreciating the acknowledgement. Technology is just applied knowledge. Sometimes, we get so focused on the application that we forget the knowledge underneath. As the other cadets gathered around, each expressing similar sentiments in their own ways, Elena realized they had learned far more than simple survival. They had discovered the value of observation, adaptation, and cooperation, lessons that would serve them long after they graduated from the Academy. The ship's engines hummed as they accelerated toward the Academy's orbital station. Behind them, Kale 7 continued its frigid night cycle, the ice crystals waiting silently for the next visitors to discover their hidden potential. For Elena, the journey had confirmed what she had always believed, that human ingenuity and analog skills still had a place in the galaxy's technological future, not as relics of the past, but as essential foundations that could bridge gaps when advanced systems failed. As she drifted into much-needed sleep, her last thoughts were not of the accolades that would inevitably come, but of the fire they had created from ice, a perfect metaphor for finding hope in the most inhospitable conditions. On Kale 7, 300 hours of night remained. But Elena and her companions had already seen the dawn of a new understanding. Sometimes, in the coldest darkness, the most unexpected light can emerge. They had burned ice to survive the night. In doing so, they had illuminated a path for others to follow, not just across Kale's frozen surface, but through the challenges that awaited them among the stars. The fire was out, but its impact would burn long into the future. Elena dreamed of ice that burned like stars, and woke to a galaxy forever changed by what they had discovered in the dark.